Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator, and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to DEI After 5. I am so looking forward to this conversation because as I was preparing and as I was thinking about what we can talk about, so many things have just happened, and I want to be able to talk to someone that I know will be able to just kind of get down and into the weeds with it. And so today, my guest is Dr. Janice Gassam Asare. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm well rested. I am trying to be really intentional about my sleep. Even though I drink coffee every morning from your the equity equation mug. I love my mug. And I'm actually drinking out of a different mug today, but I get my coffee, but I get my rest. I've been trying to get more movement in, so I'm doing good. I hope you are as well.
I am. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So, as I was preparing, like I said in the top, so many things have happened. And, I'm at this place in my business where I'm tired of talking. I'm like, okay, this awareness thing is cute. We're at this place now where people should just be aware. And if they're not aware, Google is free. And so how do we move from awareness to action, right? How do we start churning? How do we start getting organizations to change things, right? And so I wanted to really think about, okay, now that we're at this place, how do we deep dive into some of these areas where people are tripping up? And so not too long ago, you did a piece on professionalism and kind of what that looks like in this space. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that, because I think as organizations are revamping policies and procedures, we're questioning, like, what does professionalism look like? So can you talk to me a little bit about kind of what you're hearing and what you've been seeing lately?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that with remote work, employers have been a little bit more open-minded and lax about their standards of professionalism and what is professionalism. But what's interesting, Sasha, is I'm still hearing that these sort of like Eurocentric standards of beauty, for example, are still being translated into remote work. So I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and there was a Black female employee who said she was on a Zoom call and her manager in front of her entire team asked her on the Zoom call if her hair was real, right? She changed her hairstyle and he made a comment and said, "Is that all your real hair?" In front of, like, this is a team Zoom call, right? So I think that even though a lot of Black employees specifically have reported less microaggressions because they're not actually in an office, I think some of them are still like translating over. But I do think that the ability to just work in your own space, have your kids running around in the background or have your pets running around, or not be in, professional clothes, not necessarily feel as nervous, if you have non-professional hairstyles. I think remote work promotes all of that, like authenticity and people bringing their authentic selves to work. So I'm really for remote work. It's kind of frustrating that there has been a push to bring everyone back into the office. I know a lot of employers want the hybrid work lifestyle, but I just think, for me personally, even like in academia, I think these students could thrive and do really well in a virtual type of environment. But of course, I think everything kind of goes back to money, right? And if students are on campus or people are in offices, you have that amount of control. You can see what they're doing. You can see how they're working. So I do think our standards of professionalism are loosening up, but I do see some of them still translating over into like remote work still.
I'm still shocked with that story, right?
Yeah.
But then think about the Crown Act,
Mm-hmm.
has just recently passed.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, it's why do we even need to have an act about how your hair grows out of your head, right? But for others, it's a very critical step in the process. Because I remember working in an organization where, just like most Black women, would change my hair all the time, and I noticed that when my hair was in braids or natural, our CEO would barely speak to me. As soon as it was straight, he would spend hours at my desk talking and chit-chatting and just loving to hang out. And I had a senior leader say to me, if you want to move up and stay in good graces with him, you need to keep your hair straight. And I was just like, how does that have anything to do with like my work doesn't change?
Yeah. Wow. It was that's so interesting, right? Because it's so interesting, Sasha, because a lot of people are baffled at why there even needs to be like laws protecting against hair discrimination, right? I literally just posted a picture today with this hairstyle because I'm trying to be more intentional about sharing hairstyles that I was afraid to wear years ago. And there was somebody who commented who is not a Black woman who said, I don't believe that she's like, I've never looked at a Black woman and thought that hairstyle was unprofessional, right? And it's this idea that because you haven't thought something or because you haven't personally experienced something, that it's not something that like happens, right? So I was a little bit frustrated by that comment because she's acting like it just doesn't happen, when I literally have a student who months ago, this was maybe January or February, we were having a discussion about Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And I said, maybe in the future, in your lifetimes, you'll see hair becoming a federally protected class. And all of my students, I don't know their ages, but they look in their late teens or early 20s, right? These are undergraduates. And I had one student who raised his hand and said, I'll be honest with you, I don't think all hairstyles are professional. I think afros are not professional. He said, if I turn on the TV and I see a newscaster with an afro, I'm changing the channel. These were his exact words, right? And I was shocked. I was taken aback. I'm very rarely like speechless in my classes, but I didn't even know what to say, because this idea of like the TikTok generation being so woke, I think is true, but I think a lot of these young people are regurgitating the same sorts of prejudices and racism that they see within society and that they see their parents, engaging in. How is it that a 20-year-old person is telling me that they think an afro is unprofessional, and this woman on my LinkedIn is saying, questioning whether it even happens, right? So it's like, it's still flying under the radar, where people just think because it's not something that happens to them, it's not something that happens at all, right?
Yeah.
So it's really frustrating to me, because it's like the same sort of comments, like, what do you mean this doesn't happen? Your hair isn't unprofessional. Like, and it's like, thank you, I'm glad you feel like that, but there's so many people who I've luckily never experienced that, where an employer told me I had to change my hair, but I'm also not in corporate America, right? So like, just like you had that experience, I don't think that it's outside the realm of possibility that those sorts of things are still happening.
And it's interesting because sometimes it's a lot of times it's unspoken. Right. And that's the nuance in this, where someone said to me, oh, if you keep your hair straight, you might do better. But oftentimes we don't even have that conversation, right? We're listening or talking to folks and we're trying to figure out, well, why am I not getting this opportunity? But it's because behind closed doors, they're having that conversation, right? And it's not being said, oh, it's about her hair, but she doesn't show up in a professional manner, or she doesn't have professional presence, right? And it's those types of phrases that have the same impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I think it's important that organizations start to stop and think about those conversations and
Mm-hmm.
how those are hindering the progress and the inclusion of people that may wear their hair in a certain way or wear garb, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's more ethnically based
Mm-hmm.
than the traditional corporate space,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I
Yeah.
think those
And
are the things
even,
that are important.
and even the food. I remember like
Mm,
my mom was a school teacher, and she always used to make comments about how people would comment about how, like, in the teachers lounge, they would smell the food that she was like warming, and it was always comments about like, what is she eating? Is it fish? Is it this? Is it that?
mm,
So even like the commentary in the food we eat, the lunch that we are making, small like little things like that that make you feel othered, and that make you feel tokenized, and that make you feel like
mhm.
you're just an outsider in your own organization.
Yeah. And it's those things that, okay, once we hear it, what do we do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What do we communicate to those that say it and those that are impacted by it?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think for so long, people have said, oh, I'm not going to say anything or I'm not going to do
Mm-hmm.
anything. But
Mm-hmm.
that just perpetuates the microaggressive behavior and
Yeah.
it doesn't change the culture. And so now
Mm-hmm.
this 2.0 is okay, what do you say? What do you do in
Mm-hmm.
these situations? And making
Yeah.
sure that that's a part of the conversation as you're having these DEI discussions.
Yeah.
You brought up a word that again has been top of mind for me and is tokenism, and you had recently um, done some work in that space as well
Mm-hmm.
too. And it's interesting because I'm kind of looking at tokenism in two different ways. One, I'm looking at it as we're going to put this person of color in this position to say, yep, see here, that's our person of color, but we don't give them any power, authority, anything like that. Then I also see people that are actually very well qualified for the roles, but because they are the quote unquote diversity hire, no one takes them seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's damage that can be done on both sides of that. And so I want to talk to you just about kind of what you've been doing and seeing in this space around tokenism and what organizations can do to ensure that they are not tokenizing their employees.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that we all were seeing in 2020 was that a lot of the non-white employees were expected to like take on the load of
Mhm,
doing DEI work. And I think that that is one of the primary ways that employees from marginalized backgrounds are tokenized, where it's like you're assuming that this Native American employee wants to educate everyone in their company about their experiences as a Native American, their history, their culture, what inclusion and equity and diversity is. Like, I think the assumption that people from a particular culture or background want to do work centered around
mhm,
that is one way that people are tokenized. Because I have friends who, when the murder of George Floyd happened, one friend in particular, he is like a 6'5", a tall, big 6'5" Black man. And he said that he was moved to tears when he was sharing a story. He was asked by his company leadership to share a story about racism he experienced as growing up or as a kid after
mhm,
George Floyd. And that was really frustrating to me because I was like, why do we have to bare our souls for the
mhm,
sake of like white learning and white enlightenment? And I felt like just listening to him say that and say he started crying and all of this, it felt very sort of like tokenizing. Like, did you
mhm,
consider the fact that maybe this person who does nothing related to DEI, maybe this person didn't want to share that story, but felt obligated to because you as the CEO asked him to, right? So I think that like, um, what is it called? Exploiting people for their trauma and their pain and their experiences is one way that tokenization happens in the workplace. So I think being really mindful of boundaries and not assuming because someone is of a particular background that they want to speak on behalf of their community. If I'm part of the trans community, maybe I don't want to speak on behalf of all trans people, right? Maybe I don't want to speak on behalf of all Black women, whatever the case may be. But I also think when you think about tokenization, it also shows up very clearly in when you're hired for a job. I really think companies are still focused on just that diversity piece because it's the most tangible thing people can see. So when people are trying to assess progress, they just look at the faces, right? And so I think there's still so much emphasis on just getting people that look like us in the door. And I think when it comes to like chief diversity officers, they set so many of us up to fail because they just want our faces on their websites, but they don't provide us with the team, right? They don't provide us with, I know that you spoke with Dr. Sam.
Yes.
And I know she shared with, and I don't know how deep she went into it, but I know she shared with me her experiences when she was a chief diversity officer at a very large company. And she said one of the things that sort of the ways that they set her up to fail was that they didn't provide her with the support and the team that she needed to do the job well, right? And so they can do that. They can appoint us into positions, not provide us with the support, and then say, see, that's why we shouldn't have invested our money in. That's why, DEI is just a waste, right? Without acknowledging it gives you that scapegoat, right? And I think that that's one of the ways also that Black people, specifically Black women, are often tokenized, because it's a lot of times it's us as Black women who are holding these chief diversity officer and diversity manager positions. So I see both of those when it comes to tokenization in the workplace.
It's interesting because I think even in that first part of what you said, there's so many employees, especially at smaller companies, that may be the only. And after the last 2 years, it's like, oh yeah, we want you to lead our diversity efforts or help us with this. I fell into that category, right? And that was way pre George Floyd. But what I've noticed, and the reason why I notice a lot of these, is because many of them come to me to coach them on how to deal with these situations. One, many of them are like, I don't even want to do diversity and inclusion work. Like I got hired to be an engineer or to do more, something else within the organization. They did not get hired to do this work on top of what they were hired to do. And part of the exploitation of this is that's free help. Like that, companies are looking at that as free help. Why hire someone when we can have this Black and brown person over here do it for us for free?
Yeah.
The other piece to that is they are not experts either. They're experts in their experiences, but they're not experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so oftentimes they're having to learn or make mistakes the hard way. And it's almost the same setup, right? It's like you're asking the world of these folks that aren't even chief diversity officers to lead a charge with no resources, no support, nothing else. And then you're trying to figure out, okay, why 2 years later we haven't made any progress?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then it's like, I knew we shouldn't have invested in this, or when they do invest money, right? But yeah, it's like having to learn additional things outside of the scope of your job. If you're not passionate about something, having lived experience shouldn't be the only sort of requirement to do this work or be in this space, right? I think it is very helpful, right? I think it should be maybe a necessity, but it's not the only necessity, right? Because there's many Black people, for example, who have their lived experience, but don't necessarily know what it means to help leaders create a culture that's inclusive to all employees, right? Just because you have that particular lived experience. So I think that is like a huge one, where it's this assumption that because you identify in a particular way that you want to do this work, and it gives companies that like scapegoat, right? It gives companies that person to say, well, that's so-and-so's job, right? Rather than leaders looking in the mirror and having to do the work themselves, it's easier to push it off on other people, right? I teach a DEI class right now to master's students, and I had them read an article about why diversity programs fail. And one of the things is that, the mandatory trainings that companies always force employees to go to. And one of my students wrote a question. I had them read and then write questions. And one of my students said, if all of these particular initiatives are likely to fail, why do companies keep investing so much money in them? And I said, that's $1 million question, right? I said, it's easy, right? These are very easy. It's very like tangible. You do the thing and then you get a result. And so it's like very, rather than saying, I have to now do the work, I have to read the books and do the inner work. And now I have to change my behaviors and lead a team to be inclusive so that I'm actually creating this environment. It's much easier to hire somebody so that if it doesn't work, it gives you, again, that scapegoat rather than doing the work yourself.
Yeah, definitely gives you an out. And it's interesting because I was rereading that article last week. My days are blending together. Last week. And because I was kind of looking at my company and my business and what I do, and I've actually stopped doing workshops because, I'm just like, if they're not changing anything, so what is the root cause? What are we really trying to do in this work? And it's change culture. And so how do we change culture? And so totally revamping how I work with clients. And it's like, I'm not facilitating. I'm going to coach you on how to do this. I'm going to ask questions that are going to force you all to create this new culture yourselves, because then you hold each other accountable. So when I leave, you all have it right there, right? You're holding each other accountable, but it's a longer process. And I think you can do so much more impact from 6 months to a year than a 4-hour workshop.
Yeah. I it's funny you say that, Sacha, because there's so many, I know Dr. Sam and I speak about this often, and she'll refer people to me sometimes if they want workshops, and I'll refer people to her sometimes if they want like strategy, right? And it's interesting because there's a lot of folks, I know years ago, I spoke with Ayoko Bethia, and I hope I'm saying her name correct.
Yep, she was just on the show. Ayoko Bethia. Yep,
I knew you had. Yeah, I was gonna say I knew you had her on. But she also, when I spoke with her, she also had said she didn't do workshops. A lot of folks in the space are like, no, I don't do the workshops, especially, and that's where I'm kind of like, when companies tell me, well, we just want one right now. I'm really adamant about the fact that like you recognize that one is not going to move the needle at all, right? One is not going to do anything. But I think that because DEI has become like an industrial complex where a lot of companies just think people are in it to make money, when you offer them advice and say, honestly, one workshop, if you want this to be an ongoing sort of relationship or partnership or training series, that's to me even better. But I think consulting and working with them long term, but one workshop is not going to do anything, right? I had to reach the point where I'm like, I don't do any unconscious bias trainings. If that's what you're reaching out to me to do, I don't do those, right? Because they don't work. They're not effective. Here's all the research that proves it, right? And despite that, companies are still like, do you do unconscious bias? I don't. I do not. So I think that that's also an important piece of it, where the responsibility, you ask this question of how do we move from DEI 2.0, like how do we move from action to awareness, to action. And I think accountability is a huge part of that, where there has to be some sort of responsibility and ownership on everyone. It's not just the leaders, right? Employees might look to the leaders and say, well, it's them. I do think change can start from the bottom. I know we always hear change trickles down from the top, but I think if enough employees, junior employees, want something and they advocate for it, I do think that could actually produce changes that go all the way up to the top, right? But I think that employers have to be mindful of creating those environments. that they want to see, but also employees are responsible for that, right? Because if managers are setting the tone and setting the trends, you can't necessarily control bad apples and people on teams who are negatively impacting other folks' experiences. So I think that it goes like everyone in the company should have a vested interest in fostering these environments. I think everyone should be evaluated or rated on the environment that they're creating. I think that leaders are able to skirt out of that responsibility because they're not usually evaluated on those sorts of things where it's like, their direct reports don't have to evaluate them oftentimes. So it's like, well, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm a leader. I don't have to take any sort of accountability or ownership. And I think that's also part of the problem, especially with some of my clients that I see is like, employees are telling me leaders aren't held accountable. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And there's no checks and balances.
Yeah.
Right. There's checks and balances for junior employees through their performance reviews. But what if a manager isn't treating people fairly? Are they likely to get put on a performance improvement plan? Probably not. Right. So
Right.
I think that that's also part of the problem. As a leader, I'm not incentivized to create accountability systems for myself. Like, I don't want to be held accountable. So I'm not going to make that part of the organizational fabric. And I do think that that is a necessary piece of like going from awareness to action, is that accountability piece.
110%. And I think that's accountability has been my word for like 2020 too. It's just what is that? Me always asking, like, okay, what does accountability look like? Right? Because I think we talk about, oh, there needs to be accountability. There needs to be accountability. What does that look like? And what does that look like at every level, to your point? Because if it's just at the junior level, then there's no accountability really in place, because there's no decisions being made at that level.
Yeah.
Right. And so what does accountability look like at every single level? And there's transparency in that. And that's part of that culture shift. That's part of that culture change, because if you're an organization that was not about transparency before, okay, in order to do this and ensure that people feel that things are equitable and it's inclusive, you need to start being transparent on some of the things that you're working on. And so, I think this is part of this 2.0 that I'm starting to see in this push for. We've been doing this for a long time. Now, how do we start to make sure that we're changing policies and procedures and infuse accountability into it?
I think employee voices are being amplified through social media, and a lot of companies and leaders are terrified of being dragged on social media and cancel culture. And I think the pressure that's being put on companies is what is also catalyzing them to like say, we want a chief diversity officer, a chief branding officer. I know that Uber, when they had their issues many years ago with racial discrimination and sexual discrimination or sexual harassment, they hired Bozoma St. John, who is like a chief marketing officer. And I think she was their chief branding officer. So it's like the recognition that like you're getting dragged on social media, you're being canceled. How do we fix the culture? But I think that sometimes a lot of these efforts aren't sustainable because they're superficial, right? We're just hiring somebody. I don't know how much one person can transform an entire culture and system. So I think that was particularly with Bozoma St. John. I like her. I follow her content. I think she's inspiring in different ways. But I also have a friend who worked in Uber for a number of years. And she said, when Bozoma was there, she didn't see a lot of transformation. And I also think that it's hard for one person to change an entire culture. I also think Bozoma was internal. I'm biased in saying this because I'm external consultant, but I think that it's really hard to change the people that sign your checks. So like if I'm working under you and then also trying to help you to become it's very difficult. So I think it often takes outside people coming in with objective perspectives and without an understanding of the politics to really catalyze change. I don't know if it's very likely that an internal person is going to be the one that creates that change.
That actually goes to a question like my coach asked me some years ago, like, where do you have the most impact, inside or outside of an organization? And at the time I was inside of an organization and I'm like, oh yeah, no, I can do it. And then I quickly was like, nope.
Down. It wears you down, right?
Let me get out. Let me get out. But ironically, that same organization has asked me to come back as a consultant to do work, right? So it's much more impact when it's a third party that, again, can be objective, can see things that and say things that people in the organization can't necessarily say.
Yeah, exactly. So I think having that person, because if you are trying to, you have to have those tough conversations with people in leadership, and there's always going to be resistance when you're asking people to change their behaviors and implement new policies. There's always going to be resistance. And so if you're the one that is advocating for those changes, you kind of have a target on your back. And that could affect your relationships with people in the organization. So I don't know. I don't see an internal, especially at these larger companies, right? I don't know, like at an Amazon, I think it's really difficult because there's so many departments within, right? So you could, and that's why I also am leery of those lists, right? Because, and I say this, I've worked with Amazon and the teams I've worked with Amazon have been great, but Amazon is a large company. I don't work with every department. And, Amazon is a company that was on the list of best or most diverse companies to work for, but they were also sued by 5 Black women for racial discrimination. So it's like, it's very difficult for one chief diversity officer in such a large company to change and transform everyone in that, I don't know how many people work at Amazon, hundreds of thousands. It's very, very difficult. So I think thinking about like the question that your therapist said to you, or your coach said to you, where can I make the most impact? Because I do think there is a place for internal people. I just don't think, for me personally, I can endure and take on everything that it involves. It's very weathering to your body and to your spirit to be working a job, trying to change people, experiencing resistance. At some point, when you experience so much resistance, you just it's overwhelming, right? So I just don't think that that's the best use of my mental capacity. So I'm just like, I need to be external. So I have a barrier. I can unplug from, these companies. But I think that for the folks that are internal, it's like, I don't even know how to offer advice, because I don't think that everyone is in a position where they can put their jobs on the line to try to create change. And it's easy to say, oh, just leave. Don't be in that environment. Go get a new job, right? How do I know that this next place I go won't have the same problems, same issues? What do I do until I find a job? I have bills to pay. I have mouths to feed. I have student loans. I have this, I have that. So I think it sounds nice, but for some people, like the easiest thing that they can do right now is just stay where they are and figure out a way to just deal with what it is that they're going through. And it's really unfortunate that is what a lot of people's circumstances are.
And honestly, that's why I shifted my coaching to focus on practitioners for that very reason, right? The coaching side of my business, because you're in it. You can't necessarily leave. So how do you balance that, right?
Yeah.
And so the question I'm about to ask you is one that I always ask them is, what do you do to take care of yourself? How do you fill your cup? You started the call by saying you were getting rest and doing the things that you need. So what does that look like?
Yeah, for me, a big thing was getting sleep, because as a business owner, like it's really easy for us to not sleep, right? People think I think people are getting a more realistic understanding of entrepreneurship, but I feel like years ago, I thought being an entrepreneur was like being on a beach with your computer, right? Like living the good life, right? No, for me, entrepreneurship is like I'm working 7 days a week, right? And I have to force myself to, okay, this is going to be my day off. Even on my day off, right? I'm still going, like Mother's Day, right? We went to visit family, and I'm on a ferry going from Connecticut to New York, and I'm doing work on the ferry on Mother's Day, right? And it's like, oh, it's supposed to be my off day, but I might as well do work while I'm on the ferry, right? Right. So it's like, it's really, really difficult for me to not overwork. And I think as Black women, we've been like programmed to overwork because of that. Like we have to be twice as good to be considered, like, so that I definitely am still working on overcoming. But sleep is really important to me. So I actually have a device that like measures and monitors my sleep, that I'm really intentional about, like charging it, wearing it every night, so I can see how much sleep I get on average. And then I can also see per week. And in the last like 3 months, I've been getting 6 hours of sleep, which I'm the type of person, I need like 9 to feel good. And so I was like disappointed in myself every week because I'm like, oh, 6 hours. And this past week, my watch said I got 7 hours on average, and I was so happy. I felt like just like
Progress.
Yeah, really, really happy. And April was a bad month for me as far as like I was traveling a lot and I didn't get to do any sort of like movement. And for me and my self-care and my mental health, exercise is really, really, really important to me. If I'm not exercising, like when the pandemic hit in March, I remember the gyms were closed until July of 2020. And that was really hard for me. I'm not an outdoor. I'm not one of those people. I envy those people who can get on YouTube and start doing it. That's not me. I admire those people though. I'm not an outside runner. I'm not like, so I had to figure it out, and I just wasn't getting as much. So April, I was traveling a lot. So I wasn't able to like find time to really get a lot of movement. So this past week, I was intentional about making sure I'm like getting exercise in different ways. And so I was able to go 4 days last week, which is good because in April I was going like once a week, if that.
Yeah.
So I think like little steps for me. And then I think for all of us, like community is so important. I'm an extra high, like extroverted person, and COVID was tough for me, as I know it was for a lot of people, where it was lonely and very isolating. And I can't see my parents, and I'm really, really close with my mom. My parents live in Atlanta, and I just, my dad is older and has like a lot of health. He's what is it called? He's has pre-existing conditions. So I didn't want to risk seeing them. So I think leaning into the community, even if it's like an online community, like that's when I really started being on LinkedIn more, was during 2020. And I think that has really helped with my mental well-being, because if you're going through something, or you're going through a tough time, or you're just feeling overwhelmed, right? I feel overwhelmed a lot as a business owner trying to juggle full-time teaching. And hearing other people going through very similar experiences makes me feel not so alone, and makes me feel like, okay, there's other Black women who are feeling overwhelmed and this and that, and Dr. Sam and I talk a lot. And just, I was really excited for her when she got her chief diversity officer role. And then when I text her a few months later, she's like, yeah, I'm not there anymore. I left. I was like, oh my gosh, what happened? So like listening and hearing other people who feel overwhelmed, it makes me feel better, because I think sometimes also what I experience is, as a Black woman who has no children, a lot of times people make me feel like, well, you shouldn't be tired. You're not a mom, right? Or like, wait till you become a mother, right? You're going to see how hard it really is, right? So I kind of feel like sometimes I'm like, am I like able to be exhausted, or to be tired, or to be like, I call her my Haitian mom, right? There's a woman that I'm really close. She's really close with my family, and she's a Haitian woman, and she's always like, you're young, you're young and you shouldn't be tired. And I'm like, I mean, relatively young, I guess I'm in my 30s, but I'm tired, right? I'm exhausted. I can be tired and I can be exhausted. So I think just that as well setting boundaries for myself has been really important, where it's okay if I'm not working 7 days a week. I can divorce myself from the hustle mentality that I was fed to believe is what I need to be doing as a business owner. So I think all of those things have helped me with my like self-care.
I love it. I love it. And it resonates so much, right? Because a lot of this is a hustle. I mean, it feels like it's that hustle mentality. And I know for me, the last month or so has been how do I get off this hamster wheel, but let the wheels keep running. Like that's the process
Yeah.
for me,
Oh,
right?
that is like, that's what I'm trying to do, right? I was talking to my accountant and she's like, you know, if you don't want to hire out, which I'm not the type of person that I want to have like 10 people doing the same thing, that I am not like trying to build a global conglomerate,
Empire,
but I know
right?
some people are.
Right.
Because if I do that, I need to be like doing this many trainings and this, and I don't want to do that. But I also know that I'm a one woman business essentially. And if I'm not feeling good, the business isn't generating income, right? So it's like, it's also scary. So how do I get the hamster wheel going without me actually needing to be on it? Has
Yeah.
been something that I've been thinking a lot about in 2022.
Yeah. We'll talk. We'll talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Janice, thank you so much for joining me today. And I think a lot of folks that are listening in will be able to grab some nuggets from this, because this 2.0 is where we're going. Like this is the new direction of this work. And I think some of the folks that came in just to join, to have fun, will start to fall off when they realize, okay, there's a next level to this. So
Mhm.
thank you for your insights on that, and for your self-care. And I think the vulnerability in sharing that is going to be helpful to lots of people, including myself. So thank
Well,
you.
thank you, Sasha. It was great to speak with you, and I definitely look forward to hearing more of these conversations on your DEI After 5. So I love what you're doing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching and listening. And as always, you can catch us on Tuesdays at 5:15 on YouTube or on your favorite podcast station. And we will just see you next time. Have a good one.